Her husband sold her $2
I
million
wish you
ranch
could
to his new
understand.
girlfriend for $5. He
I do
thought she'd
understand.
cry and walk away quietly. Instead, she smiled. He had no idea what she'd already done, long before he made his move. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of a woman who's already won. A very powerful story with a great ending. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. May the Almighty touch your hearts with peace that heals every wound and love that never ends. May He fill your homes with light so pure that no darkness can stay, and bless your hands with the power to create, to nurture, and to lift others with kindness. May every woman stand tall in dignity and grace, every man walk with honor and compassion, and every child rise with joy that makes the world brighter. I pray that every tear turns into strength, every challenge into wisdom, and every sunrise brings you closer to the life you dream of. Wherever you are, may God's mercy follow you, protect you, and remind you you are never alone. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." The barn doors swung open like the jaws of fate, and Rachel Mills saw him for the first time, a stranger made of rain and desperation, collapsing into her world with the weight of a man who'd lost his way. She didn't know then that saving him would be the first step toward losing herself. Lightning split the Texas sky in jagged silver veins, illuminating the figure crumpled against her barn door. Rachel had been mucking stalls when the storm rolled in, one of those violent prairie tempests that turned the world sideways. Through the driving rain she saw him, a man on his knees, blood mixing with rainwater down the side of his face, his hands pressed against the weathered wood, as though the barn itself was the only thing keeping him tethered to consciousness. Jesus, she breathed, dropping her pitchfork and running toward him. His weight nearly took them both down as she hauled him inside. He was tall, solid, completely drenched. Up in the hayloft, she heard the creak of floorboards, Andy, her boy, watching with wide eyes from the safety of his makeshift reading fort. "Baby, bring me the first aid kit from the office." The big one. Andy's footsteps thundered down the ladder. At 8 years old, he moved through the world with a seriousness that sometimes broke Rachel's heart. Too much responsibility too young, but that was what happened when it was just the two of them against everything else. Rachel eased the stranger onto a hay bale, tilting his face toward the kerosene lamp. The gash above his eyebrow wasn't deep, but head wounds bled, like mercy had never been invented. She pressed a clean cloth against it, and his eyes opened, deep brown, disoriented, searching her face like she might be a dream he was afraid to trust. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "David." His voice came out rough, like gravel under tires. "David Chrisman. My truck, there was water across the road. I didn't see it until it flipped you." Rachel finished, dabbing antiseptic on the wound. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You're lucky you made it here. Next ranch is 15 miles east." Andy appeared beside her, medical kit clutched to his chest. His gaze fixed on David with an intensity that made Rachel's stomach tighten. Her son had learned early to assess threats, to measure the distance between safety and danger. "It's all right, baby," she murmured. "He's hurt. We help people who are hurt." David's eyes moved to Andy, then back to Rachel. Something shifted in his expression, softness breaking through pain. "You do this often? Save random idiots from storms?" "The first time," Rachel replied, threading a butterfly bandage across the wound. "But I've pulled plenty of horses out of bad situations. Figure the principle's the same. Be gentle, move slow, don't spook them." A smile ghosted across David's mouth. "You comparing me to a horse?" If the horseshoe fits." The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the barn rafters hard enough to send dust spiraling down through the lamplight. David tried to stand, swayed, and Rachel's hand shot out to steady him. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world contracted to just that point of contact, her palm against his chest. his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her fingers. "You're not going anywhere tonight," she said firmly. "Road's washed out by now anyway. There's a cot in the tack room. It's not much, but it's dry." He didn't argue. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he sensed, as Rachel did, that something had shifted the moment he'd stumbled into her barn, some invisible gear clicking into place that neither of them could see yet, but both of them felt. She set him up in the tack room with blankets that smelled like hay and horse and hard work. Andy brought him water without being asked, then retreated to his loft, watching everything from above, like a small, serious sentinel. Rachel should have gone back to the house, should have left this stranger to sleep off his accident and be gone by morning. Instead, she found herself sitting on an overturned bucket outside the tack room door, listening to the rain drum against the roof. "You still out there?" David's voice drifted through the darkness. "Making sure you don't have a concussion and die in my barn. Bad for property values." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was warm enough to cut through the storm's chill. "What's your name?" "Figure I should know who to thank for saving my life." "Rachel. Rachel Mills." "Rachel Mills," he repeated, like he was testing how the syllables fit together. "You run this place alone?" "Me and Andy, my son. The serious one, who looked at you like he was trying to decide if you were friend or foe." Smart kid. What did he decide? Rachel considered that. Jury's still out. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that held weight, that meant something beyond the absence of words. Outside, the storm began to soften, rain shifting from assault to whisper. "I don't usually end up in strangers' barns," David said eventually. "In case you were wondering if this is a habit, I wasn't wondering." "Liar," Rachel smiled despite herself. "Maybe a little. I'm a decent man, Rachel Mills, or I try to be. Lost my folks a few years back, farm accident. Been drifting since then, picking up work where I can find it. Tonight I was heading toward Austin, thought I could outrun the storm." He paused. "Guess I thought wrong." "Or maybe you ended up exactly where you needed to be." The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Rachel Mills didn't believe in fate, didn't trust anything she couldn't hold in her hands and prove with sweat. But something about this moment felt written, inevitable, like a page turning in a book she'd been reading her whole life, without knowing it. "Tell me about your horses," David said quietly. "I saw them in the stalls. Beautiful animals." So she did. Rachel talked about the rescue horses she rehabilitated, the ones other people gave up on, the broken and the forgotten. She talked about how Andy had learned to walk holding onto a mare's mane, how this barn was more home than the house had ever been. She talked until her voice grew rough and the storm outside died completely, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. When she finally stood to leave, her legs cramped from sitting too long, David's voice stopped her. "Rachel." "Yeah?" "Thank you. Not just for tonight, for talking to me like I'm not a burden, like I'm worth the time." Something in her chest cracked open just a little. "You are, David Chrisman. You are." She climbed the ladder to the loft, where Andy had fallen asleep in his fort, a book open across his chest. Rachel brushed the hair back from his forehead, and his eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Is that man gonna stay?" "Not just for tonight, baby. Just until morning." But morning came and David didn't leave. He helped mend a broken fence post, his hands sure and strong. He fixed the gate that had been hanging crooked for months. He taught Andy how to tie a proper bowline knot, patient and kind, in a way that made Rachel's throat tight. A week passed, then another. David took the spare room in the house, paying rent by working the property, and somewhere in those quiet days, something bloomed between them that neither had the words for yet. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Rachel and David stood by the fence watching Andy race one of the gentler horses across the pasture. The boy's laughter carried on the wind, pure and bright. "He looks at you like you're the sun," David said softly. Rachel felt her heart stutter. "And how do you look at me?" David turned to face her fully, and the expression in his eyes was answer enough, tender and terrified and utterly certain all at once. Like you're the first real thing I've seen in years. Like you're the reason I ended up in that storm. Like maybe I've been looking for you my whole life and just didn't know it." Rachel's breath caught. She'd been alone for so long, building walls brick by careful brick. But David Chrisman had stumbled into her world through a storm, and somehow those walls had crumbled without her even noticing. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. I have a son. I have this place. I have responsibilities that don't bend for anybody. I know. If you're going to leave, David, if this is just temporary, you need to tell me now, because Andy's already getting attached. And her voice broke. I can't do this if it's not real." David reached out, cupping her face in his calloused palms with a gentleness that undid her completely. "I'm not leaving, Rachel. I don't know how to explain it, but from the moment I saw you standing in that barn doorway, something in me knew. This is where I belong. You are where I belong." And then he kissed her soft and sure. And Rachel Mills, who had survived abandonment and single motherhood and every hardship the world could throw at her, finally let herself fall. Up in the house, framed in the window, Andy watched his mother kiss the stranger who'd become something more. He pressed his small hand against the glass, and in his chest a hope he didn't have words for, yet began to bloom. But hope, Rachel would learn, was a dangerous thing. It made you believe in forevers that weren't promised. It made you trust that lightning could strike twice without destroying everything in its path. It made you forget that the same storm that brings a man to your door can just as easily tear your whole world apart. Chapter 2. Vows. Written in dirt. David proposed on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at directly. They'd been working the south pasture together, replacing rotted fence posts, and Rachel had stopped to wipe sweat from her forehead, her shirt clinging to her back in the heat. When she turned around, David was on one knee in the dirt, no ring in his hand, just his eyes full of everything they'd built together in the months since that storm. "I don't have much," he said quietly. "No diamond, no fancy speech. But I have these hands, and I have this heart, and both of them are yours if you'll take them. Marry me, Rachel. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life proving I was worth saving." Rachel's knees went weak. Andy was watching from atop the fence rail, holding his breath, and she could feel the weight of this moment settling into her bones, the kind of choice that would define everything that came after. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, David Chrisman, I'll marry you." He stood and pulled her close, lifting her off the ground, spinning her until they were both laughing and crying and covered in dust. Andy whooped and came running, throwing himself into their embrace, and for one perfect moment, Rachel believed the universe had finally decided she deserved something good. They married in the barn where they'd met, because where else could it be? Rachel wore a simple white dress she'd found in town, and wildflowers woven through her dark hair. Andy walked her down the makeshift aisle between hay bales, his small hand gripping hers tight. His expression so solemn and proud, it made the handful of witnesses dab at their eyes. David stood waiting at the front, and when he saw her, his face transformed. Like every hard thing he'd ever endured had led to this exact moment. And it was worth it. All of it. The vows were simple. Traditional words about love and honor, about sickness and health. But afterward, David took Rachel's hand and led her outside to the old oak tree behind the barn. He'd carved something into the trunk, a single word, forever. "That's my real vow," he said, his voice rough. "Not just until things get hard. Not just until we disagree or struggle or face whatever's coming. Forever, Rachel. That's what you get from me." Rachel traced the letters with her fingers, and then pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, couldn't afford much of anything, really. But that night, with Andy asleep in his room, and the stars bright through the bedroom window, Rachel felt richer than any person had a right to feel. "I want to build something with you," David whispered against her hair. "Something permanent, something we can leave to Andy when we're old and grey." "Like what?" "A real ranch. Not just rescue horses, but a legacy. Land that means something. Rachel's heart swelled. She'd been dreaming the same dream, but she'd never let herself speak it aloud, too afraid that saying it would jinx it, make it evaporate like morning dew. "I have some money saved," she admitted. "Not much. My grandmother left me a little when she passed. I've been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment." David pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious. "Are you sure? That's yours, Rachel. Your safety net." "No," she said firmly. "It's ours now. That's what marriage means, right? What's mine is yours." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "What's mine is yours too. Every penny, every dream, every piece of me." They spent the following weeks looking at properties, driving dusty roads with Andy in the back seat, pointing out parcels of land that called to them. Most were too expensive, too run down, too far from town. But then they found it. A sprawling property with good bones and better possibilities, rolling hills that caught the sunset just right. The asking price made Rachel's stomach drop. It was everything they had and more, would require loans and faith and the kind of risk that kept her up at night. But when she walked the land with David, feeling the earth solid beneath her feet, something in her soul said yes. "We can do this," David said, reading her hesitation. "Together, Rachel. We can build this." So they did. They signed papers that felt like signing their lives away, committed to a mortgage that would stretch them thin for years. Rachel put down her grandmother's inheritance as the deposit. Every dollar her grandmother had scrubbed floors and worked herself to bone for. It felt sacred using that money, like her grandmother was reaching back through death itself to give Rachel this chance. They named it Eternity Ranch. David built the sign himself, rooting the letters into a thick slab of oak, then mounting it at the entrance. Rachel stood beside him as he set the final bolt, and when he turned to her, there were tears in his eyes. "We did it," he said, wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." Andy came running from the house, their house now, on their land, and threw himself at them. "Can I pick my room? The one that faces the horses?" "You can pick any room you want, buddy," David said, ruffling his hair. "This is your home, your legacy." That night they christened the ranch properly. Rachel cooked dinner on a stove that still smelled like the previous owners' lives, and they ate on the porch as the sun set fire to the sky. Andy fell asleep between them, his head on Rachel's lap, and David reached across to take her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me with this, with you, with him." David nodded toward Andy. "I know I'm not his father by blood, but Rachel, I swear to you, I'll love that boy like he's mine. I'll protect him. I'll show him what a man should be." Rachel's throat tightened. "You already do, David. You already are everything he needs." They sat in that perfect silence, the kind that only comes when people are exactly where they're meant to be. Stars emerged overhead, and somewhere in the distance a horse whinnied softly. Everything felt right. Everything felt earned. Rachel carved their initials into the porch beam that night, while David was tucking Andy into bed. RM plus DC, surrounded by a heart. It was silly teenage, but she didn't care. This was her declaration, her mark on this place that was finally, impossibly theirs. Weeks turned into months, and life settled into a rhythm so sweet it scared her sometimes. Rachel would wake before dawn to David's arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. They'd work the land together, side by side, building fences and clearing brush and dreaming bigger dreams. And he thrived, growing brown and strong under the sun, learning the land the way other children learned mathematics. They started traditions without meaning to. Sunday morning pancakes on the porch, evening rides around the property to check on the horses, bedtime stories where David would add ridiculous voices that made Andy dissolve into giggles. Rachel would watch them together and feel her heart expand in her chest, almost painful in its fullness. David built Andy a treehouse in the old oak, spending weekends measuring and sawing and hammering, while Andy handed him tools and asked 1,000 questions. When it was finished, they carved all 3 of their names into the wooden floor. A family, their family. permanent and real. Rachel taught David her grandmother's recipes: fried chicken that took all day, biscuits that required patience and practice, sweet tea that was more art than science. He'd stand beside her in the kitchen, flour on his hands, laughing when he inevitably messed something up, and she'd guide his hands, show him the technique her grandmother had taught her. These moments felt like weaving them together, thread by thread, until they were so intertwined that separation seemed impossible. One evening, Rachel stood in the pasture watching David teach Andy how to gentle a new rescue horse, a skittish mare that shied from every touch. David moved slow and patient, showing Andy how to approach without threat, how to earn trust instead of demanding it. "See, buddy, you can't force it. She's been hurt before. She needs to know she's safe now." Andy nodded seriously, copying David's movements exactly. And watching them together, her son and her husband, Rachel felt a completeness so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. This was everything. This was the life she'd clawed and fought and survived for. This was the reward for every hard day, every lonely night before David had stumbled into her world. But as she stood there, bathed in golden light, something cold whispered through her chest. A premonition, a warning, the same instinct that had kept her alive through hard times, now telling her to hold this moment close, because nothing this perfect lasted forever, nothing this beautiful stayed unbroken. David looked up from the horse and caught her watching. He smiled, that devastating, gentle smile that had undone her from the start, and waved. Rachel waved back, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. "Mama!" Andy called. "Come see! She's letting me pet her." Rachel walked toward them, toward her family, toward the life they'd built from storms and faith and foolish hope. She didn't know yet that this was the beginning of the end. Didn't know that the man teaching her son about trust would soon teach them both about betrayal instead. All she knew was this moment, this perfect golden moment, and she held it like water in her palms, precious and already slipping away. Chapter 3. The Sound of Cracking Ice. The first crack appeared on a random Thursday that should have been ordinary. Rachel was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard David laugh, that specific laugh, higher and brighter than the one he used with her. She looked through the window and saw him outside by his truck, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing animatedly as he spoke. His whole body language had changed, become younger somehow, more animated. When he came inside, she asked casually, "Who was that?" "Just someone from town. Nothing important." He kissed her cheek and grabbed a sandwich, already moving toward the door again. "I need to run some errands. Be back before dinner." It was the smoothness of the lie that bothered her, the ease with which it left his mouth. Rachel told herself she was being paranoid. Marriage required trust. David had given her no real reason to doubt him. But that night, as she folded laundry in the bedroom, her hand brushed against his jacket pocket and felt paper inside. She should have left it alone, should have respected his privacy. But her fingers moved of their own accord, pulling out a folded note written on expensive stationery. "You make me feel alive again." Last night was everything. S. The world tilted sideways. Rachel sat hard on the bed, the note trembling in her hand. Last night, David had said he was helping a neighbor with a broken water heater. He'd come home late, smelling like soap, his hair damp from a shower that wasn't theirs. She'd believed him. She'd actually believed him. Andy appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder. "Mama, you okay? You look funny." Rachel folded the note quickly, shoving it back in the pocket, forcing her face into something resembling normal. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." "How was school?" But Andy's eyes were too knowing. He'd always been able to read her, could sense emotional weather the way animals sensed storms. "Did something bad happen?" "Die." "No, sweetheart. Nothing bad. Come here." He came to her and she pulled him into her lap even though he was getting too big for it, burying her face in his hair. He smelled like playground dirt and innocence. and she wanted to preserve that innocence forever, keep him from knowing that people you loved could become strangers wearing familiar faces. "Mama, you're squeezing too hard." She loosened her grip but didn't let go. "I love you, Andy. You know that, right? No matter what happens, I love you more than anything in this world." "I know." He pulled back to study her face. "Are you and David fighting?" "No, baby. We're not fighting." But that was the truth, wasn't it? They weren't fighting because Rachel hadn't said anything, hadn't confronted him, hadn't demanded an explanation for the note that was burning a hole in his jacket pocket. That night at dinner, Rachel watched David across the table. He was telling Andy a story about a horse he'd worked with as a kid, animated and warm, every bit the loving husband and stepfather he'd been since they married. But now she saw the performance in it, the way he checked his phone between bites, the way his attention kept drifting somewhere else, even as he smiled at them. "David," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yeah? Do you have something you want to tell me?" Well, for just a fraction of a second, his face went blank. Then the warmth slid back into place, smooth as oil on water. "Like what?" Rachel held his gaze, giving him the chance to confess, to come clean, to prove her wrong. "Anything at all. Anything on your mind." "Nothing I can think of. Just grateful to be here with you two. Best family a man could ask for." The lie sat between them like a corpse at the table. Andy looked from Rachel to David and back again, his small face creasing with confusion. "May I be excused?" he asked quietly. "Of course, baby." Andy fled, and Rachel was left alone with the man she'd married. The man who was already half gone, even as he sat across from her wearing the mask of devotion. She could have confronted him then, should have, but something stopped her. Some instinct that told her to wait, to watch, to understand the full scope of what was happening before she acted. If David was capable of this level of deception, who knew what else he might be hiding? So Rachel smiled, cleared the dishes, kissed him good night like nothing had changed. But later, after David fell asleep, she lay awake in the darkness, her mind racing. The note said last night. It said everything. It was signed S. Who was S? How long had this been happening? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? Rachel slipped out of bed and made her way to the small office they kept off the kitchen. She powered up the ancient computer and started searching through files. Bank statements, receipts, anything that might give her a clue. What she found made her blood run cold. Charges at hotels she'd never been to. Flowers purchased on dates she'd never received them. A pattern emerging from the numbers, telling a story David had kept carefully hidden. Her hands shook as she printed everything, tucking the papers into a folder and hiding it in the one place David would never look, inside a box of her grandmother's things in the back of her closet. Over the next week, Rachel watched her husband become a stranger. He started coming home later, his excuses growing more elaborate. A friend needed help. A job ran long. Traffic was terrible. Each lie delivered with such conviction that Rachel almost wanted to believe him, almost wanted to pretend this wasn't happening. She started keeping a journal, not for sentiment, but for documentation. Every lie time-stamped, every inconsistency recorded, every moment his story didn't match reality, preserved in black ink on white paper. She hid it in the barn office, tucked behind old veterinary records, where David would never think to look. One afternoon, while David was supposedly running errands, Rachel drove past the hotel, whose charges she'd found on their credit card statement. Sure enough, his truck sat in the parking lot. She didn't confront him, didn't take photos, just noted the location, the time, added it to the growing file that would become her armor. That night, David came home with flowers, expensive ones, the kind he never bought for Rachel anymore. She found the receipt in his pocket later while doing laundry. The flowers had been purchased in a set of 24. She'd received none. The math was simple and devastating. Andy started having nightmares. He'd wake up crying, asking Rachel if they were going to have to move, if they were going to lose the ranch. She'd hold him and lie, Tell him everything would be fine, that nothing would change, while inside her own fear gnawed at her bones. What if she couldn't protect them? What if David's planning was more thorough than her defenses? Then came the evening that shattered any remaining illusions. David was outside, talking on his phone again, pacing by the barn. Rachel stepped onto the porch quietly, not trying to hide, but not announcing herself either. His voice carried on the still air. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's trusting, almost too trusting, honestly. He laughed at something the person on the other end said. I know. It's complicated, but we'll figure it out. I promise. Rachel's legs nearly gave out. The confirmation hurt worse than the suspicion had, hearing him discuss her like she was an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. Andy materialized beside her, silent as shadow. That's how he talks to her, he whispered. The lady who's been coming around. Rachel's heart stopped. What lady, baby? The one with the yellow car. She's been here when you go into town. David said she was helping with ranch stuff, but Andy's voice got smaller. She doesn't look at him like helpers look at people, Mama. She looks at him different. Her boy. Her observant, too smart for his own good boy, had seen what she'd been too blind to notice until now. Rachel pulled Andy close. Listen to me. What you saw, what you heard, you don't say anything to David, okay? Not yet. Can you do that for me? Andy nodded against her shoulder. Are we gonna be okay, Mama? The question broke her heart because she didn't have an answer. Not yet, but she would find one. She'd survived worse than this. She'd raised Andy alone before David came along. Had built a life from nothing but determination and grit. She could survive this too. That night, after Andy was asleep and David was snoring softly beside her, Rachel made a decision. She wasn't going to cry. Wasn't going to beg or scream or fall apart. She was going to be smarter than David thought she was. She was going to protect herself and her son and the legacy she'd built. She was going to use the one thing David had never appreciated about her. Her silence. He'd mistaken her quietness for weakness, her calm for submission. He had no idea that Rachel Mills had been forged in fires hotter than his betrayal. He had no idea what she was capable of when someone threatened her family. The next morning, Rachel called a lawyer. Someone discreet, someone who specialized in asset protection. She made the appointment for the following week, told David she was going shopping. As she hung up the phone, she caught her reflection in the window, a woman who looked calm, composed, entirely in control. But inside, beneath the surface, something was shifting. The hurt was transforming into something else, something harder. David thought he'd married someone soft, someone who would break quietly when the truth came out. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. Chapter 4. The weapon she builds in secret. The law office was tucked between a diner and a hardware store, unremarkable enough that Rachel could come and go without drawing attention. She told David she needed space, needed time alone to clear her head, and for once he hadn't argued. Probably grateful for the chance to call whoever S was without worrying about being overheard. Lydia Brennan was a woman who understood survival. She wore practical shoes and kept her gray hair short, her office walls covered with photos of smiling women beside sold houses, signed settlements, second chances. She'd been recommended by one of Rachel's customers, a woman who divorced her husband after he'd tried to steal her inheritance. Tell me everything, Lydia said simply, pen poised above her legal pad. So Rachel did. She laid it all out, the note, the phone calls, the late nights, Andy's observations, the hotel charges. She explained how David had come into her life with nothing, how she'd used her grandmother's inheritance for the ranch down payment, how they'd built everything together, but she'd been the foundation. Lydia listened without judgment, taking notes in quick, efficient strokes. When Rachel finished, the lawyer sat back and studied her. First thing you need to know, you're stronger than you think you are. Second thing, we need to move carefully and quickly. If your husband is planning something, we need to ensure you're protected before he acts. Planning something? You think this is more than just an affair? Lydia tapped her pen against the desk. Men don't usually have affairs in isolation. They have exit strategies. Have you looked closely at your financial situation lately? Really looked? Rachel's stomach dropped. I haven't. David handles most of the accounts. Says he's better with numbers. Let's start there. I need you to gather every document you can find. Bank statements, mortgage papers, the deed to the ranch, any agreements you've signed. Don't tell him what you're doing. Can you do that? Rachel nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Good. Now let's talk about the ranch itself. You said you put down the entire deposit from your inheritance? Every penny. David contributed to the mortgage payments after, but the initial investment was all mine. Lydia's eyes sharpened. And the deed, whose name is on it? Both of us. We're married. Right, but let me look at the actual paperwork. Sometimes there are details that matter. How the ownership is structured, what agreements were signed during closing. You'd be surprised how often people sign things without reading them carefully. Rachel left that first meeting with a list of tasks and a growing sense of purpose. The hurt was still there, still sharp, but now it had direction. She wasn't just a woman being betrayed. She was a woman preparing for war. Over the next several weeks, Rachel became a spy in her own home. She waited for David to leave, then systematically photographed every document in his office. Bank statements showing withdrawals she'd never made. Credit card bills for purchases she'd never seen. A pattern of financial maneuvering she hadn't noticed because she'd trusted him completely. But the most valuable discovery came from the ranch deed itself. Rachel pulled it from the filing cabinet one afternoon, spreading it across the kitchen table while Andy did homework beside her. She read it carefully this time, actually read it, and found something that made her breath catch. There was a quitclaim clause, something David had told her was standard, just a formality during the refinancing they'd done months back. She'd signed it without question because he'd explained it was about making their mortgage more flexible, getting a better rate. But what the document actually said was different. It gave Rachel sole ownership of the property in the event of dissolution of marriage or under conditions where David voluntarily relinquished his claim. Her inheritance was specifically mentioned as the primary asset foundation, making her the principal owner. Rachel's hands trembled as she photographed the document, then carefully returned it to the file. David had either not read it carefully himself or he'd signed it thinking it didn't matter because he'd never leave. Either way, he'd just handed her the key to protecting everything they'd built. At her next meeting with Lydia, she spread the photos across the desk. The lawyer studied them for long minutes, her expression growing more satisfied. "This is better than I hoped. Your husband essentially signed away any claim to full ownership of the ranch. With your inheritance as the foundation and this quitclaim, we can establish you as the sole legal owner." "But we're married. Doesn't he have rights?" In a divorce, yes. He could claim portions of the equity. But if we move now, before any divorce proceedings, we can secure the property in your name exclusively. It's technical, but it's legal. We'll need to file some paperwork, transfer the deed formally into your sole ownership. The bank will need to be notified, but given the structure of the original purchase and this quitclaim, they'll have no grounds to object. Rachel felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump. "How long will this take?" 2 weeks if we move fast. Maybe 3. You'll need to sign some documents, pay the filing fees. Can you access joint accounts without raising suspicion? I can. Then do it. And Rachel, Lydia leaned forward, her expression serious. This is the point of no return. Once we file these papers, there's no going back. If your husband somehow didn't know what he signed, this will clarify things permanently. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Rachel thought about the note, the lies, the way David looked through her now instead of at her. The way Andy had started flinching when David came home late. The way her marriage had become a performance she no longer had the energy to sustain. I'm certain. Over the following days, Rachel worked methodically. She transferred funds from joint accounts into one under her name alone. Not all of it, just enough to protect herself and Andy if things went south. She made copies of everything important and stored them in a safety deposit box David didn't know about. She documented every lie, every late night, every time his phone buzzed and he stepped outside to answer it. And through it all, she smiled. She played the role of dutiful wife, keeping David comfortable, keeping him unsuspecting. It was the hardest performance of her life. One evening, David came to her with a sheaf of papers and a nervous smile. "Hey, so I've been working on getting us some additional financing, expansion possibilities for the ranch. There's a great opportunity to buy the adjacent property, but we need to restructure some things. These are just routine signatures. Bank stuff." Rachel took the papers, her heart pounding. "Let me read through them first. It's boring legal language. I already went through it all with the bank. We just need both signatures to move forward, I'm sure. But I'd still like to read them. Give me tonight." David's smile tightened. "Sure, yeah, of course." Rachel took the documents to Lydia the next morning. The lawyer read through them, her expression growing darker with each page. "Your husband is trying to refinance the ranch in a way that would give him primary ownership and you as a secondary signer. If you'd signed these, you'd essentially be giving away the protections we've been building. This isn't about expansion. This is about control." Rachel felt ice spread through her veins. "So it's not just an affair. He's planning something bigger. It looks that way. The good news is you didn't sign. And now we know we need to move even faster. I'm filing the ownership transfer papers today. In 72 hours, that ranch will be exclusively yours. Your husband won't have any legal standing to sell, refinance, or touch it without your permission." Rachel sat back, processing the magnitude of what David had almost accomplished. If she'd signed those papers, if she'd trusted him the way she used to, she would have handed him everything. Her grandmother's legacy, Andy's future, her own survival. All of it would have been gone, signed away with a pen stroke. "How close was I?" she asked quietly. "To losing everything?" Lydia met her eyes. "One signature close. That's how calculated this was, Rachel. He wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically positioning himself to take everything you built and leave you with nothing." The revelation settled into Rachel's bones like concrete. This wasn't a man who'd made a mistake. This was a man who'd planned her destruction. "What do I tell him about these papers?" "Tell him you're uncomfortable signing anything without understanding it fully. Tell him you want to talk to a financial advisor first. Stall. That's all you need to do. Stall for 3 days." Rachel went home with the unsigned papers and a story prepared. David was waiting in the kitchen, tension radiating off him. "Did you read them?" "I did. And I want to bring them to someone who can explain all the financial implications. Just to be safe." David's jaw tightened. "I already explained them to you. This is about our future, Rachel. About building something bigger. I know. And that's why I want to be careful. We've worked too hard to make a mistake now." They stared at each other across the kitchen. And for the first time since they'd married, Rachel saw something ugly flash across David's face. Anger, resentment, something that had probably always been there, just hidden under the mask of devotion. "Fine," he said coldly. "Take your time. But this opportunity won't wait forever. I understand." He left the room, and Rachel heard his office door slam. A moment later, his voice rose in a heated phone conversation she couldn't quite make out. Andy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. "Mama, I'm scared." Rachel crossed to him and pulled him close. "I know, baby, but we're going to be okay. I promise. Just a little longer, and then we're going to be okay." That night, Rachel lay awake listening to David breathe beside her. She wondered when exactly he'd stopped being the man who'd stumbled into her barn during a storm. When had the shift happened? Or had he always been this person, just waiting for the right moment to show his true face? It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she'd seen him clearly now, and she'd been smart enough, strong enough to prepare for this moment. In 3 days, the ranch would be hers. David would have no legal claim to the land they'd built together. the legacy she'd poured her grandmother's inheritance into. And when he made his move, because Rachel knew now that he would, he'd discover that his quiet, trusting wife had been 10 steps ahead all along. Silence, it turned out, was the loudest weapon she'd ever wielded. Chapter 5. The Sale That Broke the Mask. The transformation happened fast, like watching a mask dissolve in acid. 3 days after Rachel refused to sign David's papers, he stopped pretending. He came home late without excuses. He took calls in front of her, his voice intimate and low. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming the master bed was uncomfortable. The charade was over, and he didn't care who knew it. And he stopped talking at dinner. He'd retreat to his room the moment David came home, and Rachel could hear him crying through the walls. Quiet, muffled sobs that broke her heart into smaller and smaller pieces. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. Rachel was in the barn, mucking stalls, the same work she'd been doing when David first entered her life, when she heard a car pull up, yellow paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. She straightened, pitchfork in hand, as a woman emerged from the driver's seat. Simone Harlow was younger than Rachel expected. Late 20s maybe, with honey-colored hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. She walked toward the barn like she owned it, her heels sinking into the dirt. "You must be Rachel, and you must be S." Simone's smile was sharp. "I prefer Simone. David's told me so much about you." "I doubt that. He says you're a good woman, kind, simple, that you deserve better than what he can give you." The words were meant to wound, and they did. But Rachel kept her face smooth, kept her voice level. "Is there something you need, Simone? Or did you just come to gloat?" Actually, I came to tell you something. David's going to ask you to leave. He's tired of pretending, and honestly, it's exhausting watching him try. This place," she gestured around the ranch with one perfectly manicured hand, "it's going to be ours, David and me. A fresh start." Rachel's grip on the pitchfork tightened. "This ranch isn't David's to give you. That's where you're wrong. David owns half of everything here, and when you two split, he'll buy you out. Or," Simone's smile widened, "he'll find another way to make it work. He's very creative when he wants something." Before Rachel could respond, David's truck pulled up. He climbed out, saw Simone standing there, and his face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, anger, then resignation. "Simone, I told you not to come here. I got tired of waiting, baby. She needs to know the truth." David ran a hand through his hair, then turned to Rachel. His eyes were empty of everything she'd once loved about him: the warmth, the gentleness, the devotion. Now there was just calculation. "Let's talk inside," he said. They walked to the house in awful silence. Andy was at a friend's place, thank God, spared from witnessing this moment. In the kitchen, David pulled out the chair across from Rachel and sat down like he was conducting an employment termination. "I'm not going to drag this out," he said flatly. "I've met someone who makes me happy, really happy. And staying in this marriage, staying here, it's not fair to any of us." Rachel said nothing, just watched him. "I want to make this easy," David continued. "Clean. I've fallen in love with Simone, and we want to start a life together. Here. This ranch is perfect for what we're planning. And do what you're planning. And I think the best solution is for you to take some money and find a place in town, somewhere comfortable. I'll make sure you and Andy are taken care of." Rachel let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "You'll take care of us." "I will. I'm not a monster, Rachel. I know this hurts, but we both know this marriage hasn't been real for a while now. We've been going through the motions. At least I'm being honest about it." Honest. Rachel tasted the word like poison. "When exactly did honesty start? Before or after you started sleeping with her? Before or after you tried to trick me into signing away my ownership of this ranch?" David's expression hardened. "I'm trying to be civil about this. Don't make it ugly. Ugly is what you've already made it. Ugly is you bringing your girlfriend to my property. Ugly is you thinking you can just erase me and Andy from the life we built. the life we built together. I have just as much right to this place as you do." "No," Rachel said quietly. "You really don't." David leaned back, studying her. "What does that mean?" "Listen, it means I've been more thorough than you gave me credit for. It means while you were planning your exit, I was protecting what's mine." Something flickered in his eyes, the first hint of uncertainty. "Rachel, I'm not signing anything. I'm not leaving. And you need to understand something very clearly, David Crisman." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "This ranch is mine, not ours, mine. The deed is in my name. The bank accounts are protected. Every asset you thought you could manipulate has been secured beyond your reach." The color drained from David's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Check with your lawyer. Check with the county records office. You'll find that your name has been removed from every document that matters. That quitclaim you signed during refinancing? It wasn't as routine as you thought." David stood so fast his chair toppled backward. "You can't do that. We're married. I have rights. You had rights. You signed them away. And even if you hadn't, good luck explaining to a judge why you deserve half of a ranch you tried to sell behind your wife's back." "I never—" "You did." Rachel stood to face him. "I have the papers you wanted me to sign. The ones that would have transferred primary ownership to you. I have bank records showing you siphoning money. I have everything, David. Your lawyer must have been incompetent, or you were too eager to read what you were actually signing." David's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Rachel wondered if he'd hit her. If the man she'd saved from a storm would become the man who destroyed her in violence instead of betrayal. But he just stood there, shaking with rage and disbelief. "You're a snake," he hissed. "I gave you everything. You gave me lies. I built everything else myself." The front door opened, and Simone walked in like she'd been invited, her face bright with expectation. "So, is it done? Can we start planning?" David wheeled on her. "Get out!" "What?" "I said get out. Go back to your car." Simone's face crumpled. "David, now!" But she fled and the door slammed behind her. David turned back to Rachel, and now there was desperation in his eyes. The mask had finally shattered completely, leaving only the raw need beneath. "Please," he said. "Rachel, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I was confused. But we can work through this." "No, we can't. I love you. I always have." "Simone, she was just—" "Don't." Rachel held up a hand. "Don't insult me with more lies. You stopped loving me the moment you decided I was an obstacle instead of a partner." David sank back into his chair, head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Andy, don't you dare say his name. You broke that boy's heart. He looked up to you. He trusted you. I was good to him. I was a father to him. Until you weren't. Until you chose a woman you barely know over the family you promised to protect." Rachel walked to the door and opened it. "You have until tonight to pack your things and leave. If you're still here when Andy gets home, I'm calling the sheriff. This is my home." "No, David, it never was. You were a guest I foolishly let stay too long." He looked at her then, with something like recognition, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "I underestimated you. Most people do. It's my greatest advantage." David stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm going to fight this. I'm going to make your life hell. You're welcome to try, but you'll lose. You'll lose because I was smarter, because I prepared, and because the law is on my side. Save yourself the embarrassment and just go." He left without another word, and Rachel watched from the window as he threw things into his truck with violent, jerky movements. Simone's yellow car sat in the drive, engine running, and when David finally climbed behind the wheel, she pulled in behind him like a funeral procession. Rachel stood at the window long after the dust settled on the empty road. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her chest felt hollow, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion. She should have felt triumphant. She'd outmaneuvered him, protected herself and Andy, kept the ranch that David had tried to steal. But all she felt was tired, bone-deep, soul-weary tired. Outside, one of the horses whinnied, calling for its evening feed. Rachel pushed away from the window and walked to the barn, her feet carrying her through familiar motions. She filled water troughs, distributed hay, checked hooves and coats with steady, practiced hands. This was real. This work, this land, these animals that depended on her, not the fantasy marriage she'd believed in. Not the man who'd promised forever and meant until something better comes along. When Andy came home that evening, Rachel was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire. "Where's David's truck?" he asked immediately. "Gone, baby. He's gone." Andy sat beside her, his small body pressed against hers. They didn't speak for a long time, just watched the light fade and the first stars emerge. "Good," Andy finally whispered. "I'm glad he's gone." Rachel pulled him close, and they sat there as darkness fell over Eternity Ranch. The land that was theirs would always be theirs, because Rachel Mills had been strong enough to fight for it. David had thought he could take everything. Instead, he'd left with nothing, and Rachel had everything that mattered, her son, her land, her dignity intact. The storm that brought David into her life had finally passed. Now came the hard part, rebuilding in the wreckage, learning to trust again, teaching Andy that not all love ended in betrayal. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, Rachel just held her son and let herself feel the weight of what she'd survived. She'd won. The victory tasted like ash and relief in equal measure, but it was hers, and no one could ever take it away. Chapter 6. When Castles Turn to Dust. The calls started the next morning. David first, his voice sharp with panic. "Rachel, the bank says the title transfer is legitimate. This can't be legal. You can't just steal half of—" She hung up, then Simone, shrill and accusatory. "You're a vindictive witch. David told me what you did. He's going to sue you for everything." Rachel blocked the number. By afternoon, David's lawyer was leaving voicemails about contesting the ownership transfer, about marital property laws, about how they'd see her in court. Rachel forwarded everything to Lydia and went about her day feeding horses, fixing a loose fence board, pretending her world hadn't just exploded. Andy came home from his friend's house that evening, and Rachel met him on the porch. She'd been dreading this conversation for hours, rehearsing different ways to explain that the man who'd taught him to tie knots and gentle horses was gone for good. "Where's David?" Andy asked immediately, his eyes scanning the yard. Rachel knelt to his level. "He's not coming back, baby. He and we couldn't make things work anymore. It's going to be just you and me again, like it used to be." Andy's face crumpled. "Because of that lady, the one in the yellow car." Partly. But mostly because David made choices that hurt our family. And when someone hurts you like that, you can't let them keep doing it. Did he hurt you, Mama? Rachel pulled him close. "Yes, baby, he did. But we're going to be okay. I promise." Andy cried against her shoulder, and Rachel held him through it, her heart breaking for his innocence lost. He'd learned too young that people leave, that promises get broken, that love doesn't always last. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but determined. "I'm glad he's gone. He was being mean to you. I heard him on the phone saying bad things. You don't need to worry about any of that now. It's over." "Are we really going to be okay?" "We are. Because we're strong and we're smart and we take care of each other. That's what family means." That night, Rachel lay in bed listening to the house settle, feeling the absence of David like a missing tooth. Painful, but also somehow relieving. The performance was over. She didn't have to pretend anymore. Then her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Check your email." Wary, Rachel opened her inbox. The message was from David's lawyer, but instead of legalese, it was a news link. The headline made her stomach drop. "Local man claims wife. Illegally seized marital property." The article painted David as a victim, a hard-working husband blindsided by a calculating wife who'd manipulated legal documents to steal their shared ranch. It quoted him extensively, his words dripping with wounded innocence. I trusted Rachel completely. I had no idea she was planning to cut me out of everything we built together. I just wanted to end our marriage amicably, and instead I've been left with nothing. There was no mention of Simone, no mention of his affair, no mention of the papers he'd tried to trick Rachel into signing. Just a carefully crafted narrative designed to make him look like the injured party. Rachel's hands shook with rage. This was his strategy, public sympathy, making her the villain so that even if he lost in court, he'd win in the court of public opinion. She forwarded the article to Lydia with a single line. "What do we do about this?" The lawyer called within minutes. "Ignore it, don't respond. Don't defend yourself publicly. It's bait, Rachel. He wants you to react emotionally so he can point to that reaction as proof of your instability. Stay quiet. Let me handle the legal side. But people will believe him. Some will. Some won't. The ones who matter, the judge, the bank, the people who actually have power in this situation, they'll see the facts. Your husband signed documents he didn't read carefully. That's not your fault." Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to shout the truth from the rooftops. But she swallowed the impulse and forced herself to breathe. "Okay, I'll stay quiet." Good, because in about 3 days, his whole strategy is going to collapse. Lydia was right. The next morning, David's lawyer filed an emergency motion to freeze the property transfer. By afternoon, the judge had reviewed the case and denied it. The quitclaim was legitimate. David had signed it voluntarily. There were no grounds for reversal. Then the bank called David to inform him that not only did he have no claim to Eternity Ranch, but he was still liable for half the existing mortgage payments since his name remained on the original loan. He could either continue paying his portion or face legal action from the lender. Rachel learned all this from Lydia, who relayed the information with undisguised satisfaction. He thought he could manipulate the system. Instead, he's trapped himself. He gave up ownership but kept the debt. What about Simone? That's the best part. She's suing him. What? Breach of promise. Apparently, David told her he fully owned the ranch and could transfer it to her. He drew up sale papers, completely fraudulent, but he drew them up and sold her the property for $5 as a romantic gesture. She gave him money for renovations that never happened. Now she's claiming he defrauded her. Rachel sat down hard. He sold her the ranch? My ranch? Tried to. The sale was never valid because he didn't own the property to sell. But Simone didn't know that. She thought she was getting a $2 million ranch for $5 and some legal maneuvering. Instead, she got nothing, and she's furious. Good. Better than good. It means David's got legal problems from multiple directions now. Your divorce will go through smoothly. He has no leverage, no assets, and mounting debt. Meanwhile, you have full ownership of a valuable property, documented evidence of his attempted fraud, and a very strong case for primary custody of Andy since David abandoned the home. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest. It's really over. The legal part, almost. The emotional part, that'll take longer. But Rachel, you did everything right. You protected yourself and your son. You should be proud. After the call ended, Rachel walked out to the barn and stood in the exact spot where she'd first seen David, collapsed against the door, soaked and bleeding. She'd saved him that night, brought him into her home, her life, her heart, and he'd repaid her by trying to steal everything, she thought, about all the small moments she'd missed, the signs that had been there from the beginning, if she'd only known to look for them. The way he'd been almost too eager to move in, too quick to suggest combining finances, too insistent that she'd trust him with the paperwork. Had he planned this from the start? Or had the plan emerged later when he met Simone and saw an exit he wanted to take? It didn't matter now. What mattered was that she'd seen through it before it was too late. Rachel pulled out her phone and opened the photo album she'd created months ago. Every document she'd photographed, every piece of evidence she'd gathered. Hundreds of images representing hundreds of hours of careful, silent preparation. She'd built her case one screenshot at a time, one hidden photograph at a time, never letting David see what she was doing. This was what survival looked like. Not loud, not dramatic, just methodical, patient, and absolutely thorough. She deleted the album. She didn't need it anymore. The evidence was filed with Lydia, stored in safety deposit boxes, backed up in cloud storage David didn't know existed. The photos on her phone were just shadows of weapons she'd already deployed. A text came through from a number she didn't recognize. You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll pay for what you've done to him. Simone, clearly, using a new number after Rachel had blocked her. Rachel smiled and deleted it without responding. Let Simone rage. Let David spiral. Their fury was proof of her victory, but he'd failed. Not because of luck or chance, but because Rachel had been smart enough to see what was coming and strong enough to prepare for it. Andy found her there an hour later, his expression cautious. "Mama, are you sad?" Rachel pulled him close. "No, baby. I'm not sad anymore. I'm just tired, but we're going to be okay. Promise? I promise." That night, Rachel stood on the porch watching the sun set over land that was finally, legally, irrevocably hers. She thought about her grandmother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to leave Rachel something of value. That inheritance had bought this ranch, had protected it, had ensured that no man could take what generations of strong women had built. "Thank you, Grandma," Rachel whispered to the wind. "Thank you for teaching me to be smarter than I am trusting." Behind her, the house lights glowed warm. Inside, Andy was doing homework at the kitchen table, safe and secure in a home no one could take from them. David was gone. Simone was suing him. His reputation was in shambles, and Rachel was free. Chapter 7. Rebuilding Empire from Ashes. The first woman showed up on a Tuesday morning, her car dusty from the long drive, her eyes hollowed out by something Rachel recognized immediately, the look of someone who'd survived something they shouldn't have had to. Her name was Jolene Wright, and she'd read about Rachel online, not the article David had planted, the one that came after, written by a journalist who'd actually investigated the story and found the truth. The article was titled "The Woman Who Protected Her Legacy," and it painted Rachel as something she'd never considered herself, a survivor worth emulating. "I'm sorry to just show up," Jolene said, standing at the fence line like she was afraid to come closer. "But I read about what you did, how you protected yourself. And I hoped, maybe you could tell me how to do the same." Rachel invited her in for coffee, listened as Jolene explained her own situation, a husband who'd emptied their accounts, a restraining order she couldn't afford to enforce. Kids she was terrified of losing. "I don't know how to be as strong as you," Jolene finished, her voice breaking. Rachel took her hand across the table. "You already are. You drove here. You asked for help. That takes more strength than anything I did." They talked for hours. Rachel shared what she'd learned. How to document everything, how to find the right lawyer, how to be strategic instead of reactive. When Jolene left, she had a folder full of resources and something else, hope. 2 weeks later, Jolene came back with a friend. Then that friend brought someone else. Word spread quietly through networks of women who needed it. There was a ranch outside town where a woman named Rachel Mills would talk to you, help you, teach you how to protect yourself from the men who thought they owned you. Andy watched this transformation with curious eyes. "Why do all these ladies come here, Mama?" "Because they need help finding their strength," Rachel explained. "And sometimes people need to see someone else standing strong before they believe they can do it too. Like you showed me? Like we show each other, baby." The idea came to Rachel late one night as she reviewed the ranch finances. She had space, pastures and barn lofts and rooms that sat empty. She had knowledge hard-earned, And she had resources that could help more than just herself. She called Lydia. "I want to turn part of the ranch into something official. A program. A place where women can come to rebuild after what I went through." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "That's ambitious and expensive. I know, but I can't stop thinking about it. All these women showing up here, looking for answers I had to figure out alone. What if they didn't have to do it alone? What if there was a place they could come to figure out their next steps? What exactly are you proposing?" "Workshops, legal advice, financial planning, maybe counseling. Nothing permanent, just a place to catch your breath and make a plan. A sanctuary, Thunder Ridge Sanctuary," Lydia said softly. "What? That's what you should call it. Because you're not just surviving anymore, Rachel. You're making thunder." The name stuck. Within months, Rachel had transformed the ranch into something bigger than she'd imagined possible. She brought in counselors and lawyers who volunteered their time. She partnered with local organizations that worked with domestic abuse survivors. She set up the barn lofts as temporary housing for women who needed a safe place to stay while they figured out their next move. Andy became the heart of the operation. He led trail rides for kids whose mothers were attending workshops. He taught them how to gentle, skittish horses, how to earn trust with patience instead of force. Watching him, Rachel saw her own strength reflected back. The resilience that came from surviving hard things and choosing to help others through their own storms. One afternoon, a reporter called. National outlet, interested in doing a story on Thunder Ridge Sanctuary. Rachel almost said no. She didn't want attention, didn't want to become a symbol or a headline, but Lydia convinced her. "Think about how many women will hear your story and realize they can do what you did. Think about the reach, Rachel. The impact." So Rachel agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Constance Bell, spent 3 days at the ranch talking to Rachel, to Andy, to the women who came through seeking help. The article that resulted was beautiful and brutal, detailing Rachel's betrayal and her triumph without sensationalizing either. The headline read, "Silence Isn't Weakness. One woman's journey from betrayal to empire." The response was overwhelming. Calls from women across the country. Requests for advice, for resources, for speaking engagements. Thunder Ridge Sanctuary went from a local program to a national model almost overnight. And through it all, Rachel stayed grounded. She still mucked stalls, still fixed fences, still sat with frightened women in her kitchen and told them the truth, that rebuilding was hard, that some days they'd want to give up, but that they were stronger than they knew. David watched all of this from a distance. She knew because mutual acquaintances told her how he'd seen the article, how his face had gone pale, how he'd locked himself in his apartment for days afterward. Simone's lawsuit had left him broke. His reputation was shattered. No one would hire him, wouldn't trust him. He'd become exactly what he deserved to become, a cautionary tale about arrogance and betrayal. One particularly cold afternoon, Rachel received a package. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting. Inside was a check, a small amount, maybe a few $100s, and a note, "First payment toward the mortgage I still owe. It's all I have right now, but I'll send more when I can. You were right about everything." Rachel stared at the check for a long moment. Part of her wanted to tear it up, send it back with a message that she didn't want his money or his guilt. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive through everything, saw it differently. This wasn't about David seeking absolution. This was about him finally accepting responsibility. She deposited the check, added it to the sanctuary's operating fund. Every dollar he sent would go toward helping women escape the kind of man he'd been. There was a certain justice in that. Rachel felt no satisfaction in his suffering. She felt nothing for him at all, which was perhaps the greatest victory of all. He'd become irrelevant, a footnote in her story, instead of the main character he'd tried to be. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Andy came to stand beside Rachel on the porch. "Are you happy, Mama?" Rachel considered the question carefully. I'm not sure happy is the right word. I'm purposeful. I'm doing work that matters. I'm helping people. That feels better than happy. Better than when David was here. So much better, baby. Because this is real. This is mine. This is something I built from the wreckage of something broken. And that makes it stronger than anything I had before. Andy leaned against her, and they watched the sun set together over land that Rachel had fought for, bled for, and ultimately won. Thunder Ridge Sanctuary stood as proof that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was strength. It was the sound of a woman refusing to be broken, choosing instead to build something that would help others refuse their own breaking. And every woman who walked through the gates, who found her voice in the workshops, who rode horses across the pastures and remembered what freedom felt, like every single one of them was living proof that Rachel Mills hadn't just survived her betrayal, she'd transformed it into something that mattered. Chapter 8. The echo of what he lost 5 years could change. Everything. Rachel stood at the podium in a conference center 3 hours from home, looking out at an audience of several hundred women. The room hummed with anticipation, with the kind of energy that came when people gathered to learn how to save themselves. "My name is Rachel Mills," she began, her voice steady and sure. "And I'm going to tell you about the day I stopped being a victim and started being a survivor." She told her story. Not all of it, never all of it, but enough. Enough that women in the audience nodded with recognition. Enough that some cried. Enough that when she finished and opened the floor for questions, hands shot up across the room like flowers blooming. In the back row, a man sat hunched in his seat, his face half hidden behind a baseball cap. Rachel didn't notice him. She was too focused on a woman asking about legal protections, about how to hide assets without breaking the law, about how to be smart when everyone told you to be forgiving instead. David had been attending Rachel's public events for months now, always in the back, always leaving before anyone could recognize him. He told himself he was checking on her, making sure she was okay. But the truth was harder. He was obsessed with what he'd lost, tormented by the sight of Rachel, transformed into someone he'd never known she could be. She'd cut her hair shorter, carried herself differently, spoke with an authority that made people lean forward in their seats. The quiet woman he'd married had become someone formidable, someone who commanded attention without asking for it, and it was his fault. His betrayal had forged her into this. After the conference, David waited outside by her rental car. When Rachel emerged, flanked by organizers and admirers, he stepped forward. "Rachel!" She stopped, her body tensing in recognition. Security guards moved closer, but she held up a hand. "It's all right. I know him." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, leaving them alone in the parking lot. Rachel looked at David for the first time in years, and what he saw in her eyes nearly broke him. Nothing. No anger, no hurt. Just a distant acknowledgement, like she was looking at a stranger. "What do you want, David?" "I needed to see you. To talk to you." "Why?" He fumbled for words. "Because I've been watching what you've built, what you've become. And I needed you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." Rachel's expression didn't change. "Thank you for the apology. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Wait, please." He caught her arm, then immediately released it when her security detail moved forward. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make things right. You can't make this right, David. What you did can't be undone. I know that. But maybe we could talk? Have coffee? I just want a chance to explain." "Explain what? That you betrayed me? That you tried to steal my home? That you broke my son's heart?" Rachel's voice was quiet but cutting. "I know all of that already. I lived through it. I survived it. And honestly, I'm grateful for it. Grateful. Because it taught me who I really am. It taught me what I'm capable of. You thought I was weak, David. You thought I'd crumble. Instead, I built something you can't even comprehend." David's hands shook. "I see that. I see what you've done. And it's incredible. You're incredible. And I'm a fool who let you go." "No," Rachel corrected. You're a fool who thought you could throw me away. There's a difference." She walked past him toward her car, and David felt the last remnants of his hope crumble. "Rachel, wait. Is there any chance, any possibility, that someday you might forgive me?" She paused, her hand on the car door. For a long moment she was silent. Then she turned back, and her expression was almost pitying. "I forgave you a long time ago, David. Forgiveness was the only way I could move forward. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean I want you in my life. It just means I've let go of the anger that would have destroyed me if I'd held on to it. So that's it? We'll never speak again? Well, why would we? You're not part of my story anymore. You're just the chapter that taught me to trust myself more than I trust other people's promises." Rachel got in her car and drove away, leaving David standing in the empty parking lot with the weight of his choices crushing down on him. That night, alone in his cramped apartment, David opened his laptop and searched for Rachel's name. The results were overwhelming. Articles, interviews, features in national magazines. Thunder Ridge Sanctuary had become famous, and Rachel along with it. He clicked on a video. Rachel speaking at a university, her voice strong and sure. The most dangerous thing you can do to a woman is underestimate her, because she'll use that underestimation as camouflage while she builds her escape. The students applauded. Rachel smiled. Not the gentle smile David remembered, but something sharper, something earned. He closed the laptop and looked around his apartment. One room, cheap furniture, bills he could barely afford. This was what his choices had bought him. Isolation and regret and the knowledge that he'd had everything and thrown it away for nothing. Simone had taken him to court and won. His lawyer fees had bankrupted him. His reputation was so damaged he'd had to move states just to find work. And through it all, Rachel had risen while he'd fallen, the natural order of justice asserting itself. David pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. Another letter, the 20th, the 30th, begging for forgiveness, for a chance to explain, for anything that would ease the crushing weight of his guilt. But halfway through, he stopped. Rachel didn't read his letters. Why would she? He was nothing to her now, less than nothing, just a mistake she'd learned from and moved past. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash with all the others. His phone rang. A bill collector, the third one that week. David let it go to voicemail. He couldn't pay them, could barely afford groceries. The job he'd finally found paid minimum wage, barely enough to cover his rent and the mortgage payments he was legally obligated to make on a ranch he no longer owned. Sometimes, late at night, David would drive past Eternity Ranch, or Thunder Ridge Sanctuary as it was called now. He'd park down the road where no one could see him and watch the lights in the windows. Watch women arriving for workshops, their cars filling the driveway. Watch Andy, so much taller now, leading horses across the pasture. Watch Rachel, standing on the porch she'd carved their initials into, looking out over land she'd saved from him. He'd sit there for hours, engine off, windows down, listening to the sounds of life continuing without him, laughter, horses whinnying, the distant murmur of voices at a bonfire someone had built in the east pasture, community, purpose, everything he'd destroyed when he'd chosen Simone. The worst part wasn't the poverty or the loneliness. It was knowing that Rachel was genuinely happy. Not happy in spite of him leaving, happy because he'd left. He'd thought she needed him, thought she'd fall apart without him. Instead, she'd become more than he could ever have imagined, and his absence had been the catalyst. A security guard approached his car one night, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "You need to move along, sir. This is private property." David started the engine with shaking hands. "I used to live here." "Not anymore, you don't. Ms. Mills has made it clear you're not welcome." "Don't make me call the sheriff." David drove away, watching the ranch disappear in his rearview mirror, knowing he'd never be allowed back. Meanwhile, 3 hours away, Rachel sat in her hotel room reviewing notes for tomorrow's presentation. Andy, now 13 and almost as tall as she was, video called from home. "How'd it go, Mama?" "Good, really good." The turnout was even bigger than expected. Did that reporter from CNN call you back?
She did.
They want to do a segment next month. National television, baby. Can you believe it? Andy grinned. I can. You're famous now. I'm not famous. I'm just visible. There's a difference. They talked about his day, his homework, the new foal that had been born at the sanctuary. Normal things. Good things. The kind of conversation Rachel had dreamed of during the darkest days when David was destroying everything. After they hung up, Rachel stood at the window looking out over the city lights. She thought about David in the parking lot, his eyes desperate and pleading. Part of her, a small part she didn't like to acknowledge, had felt sorry for him. He'd lost everything while she'd gained everything, and there was a certain poetry in that reversal, but mostly she felt nothing. David had become an echo, something that had once been loud and important, but was now just a faint reverberation growing quieter with each passing year. She didn't hate him, didn't love him, didn't think about him unless forced to. And that, Rachel knew, was the truest form of victory. Not destroying him, not seeking revenge, simply becoming so powerful, so self-sufficient, so completely whole, that he became irrelevant to her existence. Silence had been her weapon, patience her strategy, and now she stood in hotel rooms far from home, preparing to teach other women how to wield that same power, and nothing David Chrisman could say or do would ever diminish that. He'd lost her, but more importantly, she'd found herself, and she was never letting go again. Chapter 9. The Invitation That Changes Everything. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with no return address. Rachel almost threw it away, assuming it was another speaking request or fundraising appeal. But something made her open it instead. Inside, a single card with elegant script, an art exhibit, The Woman I Lost, Gallery Moraine, downtown. This Saturday, 7 p.m., you're invited to witness what I should have protected. Rachel's stomach dropped. She knew David's handwriting, had seen it on enough legal documents and love notes from their early days together. This was his. She should have ignored it, should have tossed the invitation in the trash, and continued with her life. But curiosity, or maybe the need for final closure, pulled at her. Andy noticed her staring at the card that evening. What's that? An invitation. From David. His expression darkened. He was 13 now, old enough to fully understand what David had done, old enough to carry his own anger. Are you going to go? I'm thinking about it. Why would you give him that? Rachel set the card down and turned to face her son. Because sometimes you need to close a door all the way, instead of leaving it cracked open. I think maybe this is my chance to do that. Do you want me to come with you? No, baby. This is something I need to face alone. Andy's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked so much older than his years. He doesn't deserve even a minute of your time, Mama. He doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Rachel pulled him close, feeling the fierce protectiveness radiating from his small frame. Her boy had grown up watching her fight, watching her survive, and somewhere along the way he'd become her defender too. I love you for that. But this isn't about what he deserves. It's about what I need. What do you need? Rachel considered the question carefully. I need to see him one last time and feel nothing. I need to stand in front of him and know, with absolute certainty, that he has no power over me anymore. That's what closure really is. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just indifference. Andy nodded slowly. Okay, but if he says one wrong thing, if he tries anything, then I'll handle it. I always do. The days leading up to the exhibit crawled past. Rachel told herself repeatedly that she wouldn't go, that David didn't deserve even her presence. But Saturday evening found her standing in front of her closet, choosing what to wear to face her past. She selected a deep blue dress, simple but elegant, the kind of outfit that said she'd moved beyond needing to prove anything. She drove the 2 hours to the city, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind strangely calm. Gallery Moraine was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore. Through the windows, Rachel could see paintings lining the walls, soft lighting casting shadows across canvas. A handful of people wandered inside, studying the artwork with wine glasses in hand. Rachel took a breath and entered. The first painting stopped her cold. It was her, or a version of her. Rachel in morning light, standing in the barn doorway with a coffee mug, her profile soft and unguarded. The detail was stunning, intimate, like David had memorized every curve of her face during their years together. She moved to the next painting, Rachel mending a fence, sweat on her brow, determination in the set of her shoulders. Then another, Rachel laughing, her head thrown back, joy captured in brushstrokes. The entire gallery was devoted to her. Every wall, every canvas, moments from their marriage that David had preserved in paint. Some she remembered, some she'd forgotten. It was beautiful and terrible, seeing herself through his eyes, understanding how completely he'd observed her, even as he betrayed her. There was one canvas that made her breath catch, Rachel and Andy together. The boy nestled against her side while they watched horses in the pasture. David had captured something there, something about the bond between mother and son that felt so true it hurt. He'd seen them clearly, had understood what he was destroying, and done it anyway. Another painting showed Rachel alone in the barn late at night, her face illuminated by lantern light, exhaustion and determination mingling in her expression. It was from the period after David left, Rachel could tell. There was a hardness to her jaw, a set to her shoulders that hadn't been there before. He'd painted her transformation, the woman she'd become in his absence. Near the center of the gallery hung a smaller canvas that stopped Rachel mid-step. It showed her hands, just her hands, scarred and calloused from ranch work, holding a legal document. The title read, "The Moment She Chose Herself." David had somehow painted the exact moment she'd signed the ownership transfer papers, had captured in brushstrokes the decision that saved her life. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known about every move she'd made, had understood exactly how she'd outmaneuvered him, and instead of resenting it, he'd immortalized it. Rachel felt a chill run through her. These paintings weren't just memory, they were acknowledgement. David hadn't just lost her. He'd watched her win, had borne witness to her strategy, and now he was displaying his defeat for the world to see. The final painting was the largest. Rachel standing in an open field, the wind catching her hair, her face turned toward the sun. She looked powerful, unbroken, free. The title beneath it read simply, "What I Destroyed." "Hello, Rachel." She turned. David stood behind her, and the change in him was shocking. He'd aged a decade in the years since she'd last seen him up close. His face was thinner, harder, carved by regret into something almost unrecognizable. "These are," her voice caught, "these are all of me. I started painting after everything fell apart, after I lost you. It was the only way I could process what I'd done." He gestured around the gallery. "This is my confession, my apology, my attempt to show everyone who you really are." Rachel studied his face, searching for manipulation, for ulterior motive. She found only exhaustion and remorse. "Why, David? Why invite me here?" Because you deserve to know that I see you now, the way I should have seen you then. You were never small or simple or easy to dismiss. You were extraordinary, and I was too selfish and stupid to appreciate it." People moved around them, studying paintings, murmuring appreciation. Rachel felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. This was her life displayed for strangers, her private moments turned into public art. "I don't know what you want me to say," she finally managed. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I had, what I lost, what I can never get back." David's voice cracked. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it for someone who meant nothing. I destroyed it because I was broken inside and didn't know how to be whole." Rachel looked back at the painting of herself in the field, strong and free. "I'm glad you painted this. Not for you, for me. Because it's nice to see myself the way I've worked so hard to become. "You were always this," David said quietly. "I just didn't see it." They stood in silence, surrounded by evidence of what they'd been, what they'd lost. Rachel felt the weight of this moment, the culmination of years of pain and growth and transformation. This was the closure she'd been seeking without knowing it. A young couple approached one of the paintings, the woman pointing to Rachel's image and whispering something to her companion. They looked at Rachel, standing there, recognition dawning on their faces. The woman smiled, a small gesture of solidarity, before they moved on. Rachel realized then that these paintings weren't just David's confession. They were her validation. Every woman who saw them would see strength reflected back. Every person who studied these canvases would understand what David had lost and what Rachel had become. An older woman approached Rachel, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Excuse me, are you her?" "The woman in the paintings." Rachel nodded, uncertain. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice breaking. "My daughter, she's in a situation, a bad marriage. She won't leave because she thinks she can't survive alone. I brought her here tonight to show her these paintings, to show her what survival looks like." She gestured at the canvases surrounding them. "You're proof that women don't just survive betrayal, they can thrive because of it." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Tell your daughter she's stronger than she knows, and that the first step is always the hardest, but it's worth taking." The woman squeezed Rachel's hand, then moved on. But she wasn't the last. Throughout the evening, women approached, some to thank her, some just to stand near her as if her strength might be contagious. Rachel hadn't expected this, hadn't realized that David's exhibit would become not just his confession, but her testimony. "Is there—" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Is there any part of you that could ever forgive me? Not now, maybe, but someday?" Rachel turned to look at him fully. His eyes were wet, his hands shaking. This was a broken man, and once upon a time she'd loved him enough to save him from a storm. But that woman was gone, and the woman she'd become understood something the old Rachel hadn't. Some things weren't meant to be fixed. "I forgave you years ago, David, but forgiveness doesn't mean what you want it to mean. It doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't give you back what you threw away. I know. I needed to tell you I'm sorry. That if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. But you can't go back. None of us can. We can only move forward with what we've learned." David nodded, tears finally spilling over. "What did you learn?" Rachel smiled, but it was sad, tinged with wisdom that had cost too much to earn. "I learned that I don't need anyone to complete me. I learned that silence can be stronger than screaming. I learned that the person who underestimates you is the person you should be most grateful for, because they never see you coming." She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the gallery floor. David called after her, desperation bleeding into his voice. "Rachel, please, just tell me, was any of it real? Did you ever really love me?" She paused at the door, one hand on the frame. The gallery lights cast her shadow long and strong across the floor. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room. "I loved the man I thought you were, the man who held me during storms and promised forever. But that man never really existed, did he? He was just a mask you wore until you didn't need it anymore. That's not true. I loved you. I still—" "No," Rachel interrupted. "You loved the idea of being loved. You loved having someone who saw you as a hero. But love isn't about what you can take, David. It's about what you're willing to protect. And when it mattered most, you chose to destroy instead of protect. That's not love. That's selfishness wearing love's face." She walked out into the night air, breathing in freedom and finality. Behind her, she heard David's broken sob, but she didn't look back. Looking back had never saved anyone. Rachel drove home through darkness, her mind surprisingly clear. The exhibit had been David's attempt at redemption, but what he didn't understand was that she didn't need his redemption to be whole. She'd found that wholeness herself, built it from the wreckage of his betrayal. When she arrived at Thunder Ridge Sanctuary, every window glowed with light. Andy had left the porch light on, and as she climbed the steps, she saw him silhouetted in the doorway. "How was it?" Rachel pulled him into a hug. "It was closure, baby. Real closure. The kind where you finally understand that the past can't hurt you anymore." "Did he try to come back?" "In his own way, yeah. But I made it clear, we're not going backward. Only forward." Andy squeezed her tight. "Good, because you're too strong to waste time on someone who didn't see it." Rachel laughed, wiping away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." They stood together on the porch, looking out over land that Rachel had fought for and won. Tomorrow there would be workshops, women seeking guidance, horses needing care. Tomorrow there would be purpose and meaning and the continuation of the life she'd built from nothing. But tonight, there was just this, a mother and her son, standing strong in the home they'd protected, knowing that no storm could ever take it from them again. David could paint 1,000 pictures. He could beg and plead and apologize until his voice gave out. But it wouldn't change the fundamental truth. Rachel Mills had outgrown him years ago, and she was never looking back. Chapter 10. The thunder that ends the storm, the morning after the gallery. Rachel woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of horses calling from the pasture. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly light, like some invisible weight she'd been carrying had finally been set down. She found Andy in the kitchen making breakfast, his movements competent and sure. Her boy had grown so much, had become someone she was endlessly proud of. "Morning, Mama. I made your coffee the way you like it." "Thank you, baby." She took the mug gratefully. "What are your plans today?" "Jamal's coming over. We're going to work with that new mare you rescued last week." Rachel smiled. Jamal was Andy's best friend, another boy who understood horses and hard work and kindness. "Sounds perfect. Just be careful, she's still skittish." "I know. We'll go slow." After breakfast, Rachel walked the perimeter of the sanctuary, checking fences and gates. Women would be arriving later for the weekend workshop series, and she wanted everything to feel safe, welcoming. The sanctuary had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. What started as a few women seeking advice had become a full program with rotating counselors, legal advisors, financial planners. They'd added a greenhouse where women could work with their hands, growing things as they grew themselves back together. There was a meditation garden now, built by women who'd stayed and wanted to leave something behind. Benches with plaques, "For Sarah, who found her voice here, in memory of courage discovered." Rachel paused at one bench in particular. The plaque read, "For Rachel Mills, who showed us that silence can roar." She hadn't commissioned it, hadn't known about it until it appeared one morning, placed there by women who'd graduated from the program and wanted to honor the woman who'd created their sanctuary. She sat on that bench now, looking out over the land she'd fought for. The early morning sun painted everything gold, and she could see horses grazing peacefully in the distance, could hear the first sounds of women waking in the barn lofts, beginning another day of rebuilding their lives. Her phone buzzed. Lydia saw the article about David's gallery. "You okay?" Rachel typed back. "Better than okay. It's done. Really done." Throughout the day, women arrived at the sanctuary. Some new, nervous and wounded. Others returning, stronger now. Rachel moved among them, offering guidance without judgment. During the afternoon session, a young woman named Patricia raised her hand. "How did you know when it was really over?" Rachel considered carefully. "When I realized that his change, or lack of it, had nothing to do with my worth. I spent so long thinking if I just loved him better, he'd become the man I needed. But people don't change for others. They change for themselves if they change at all." Patricia nodded, tears streaming. "I keep thinking maybe I didn't try hard enough." "No," Rachel said firmly. "You tried. That's enough. His choices are his responsibility, not yours." After the session, Rachel found herself alone in the barn, grooming a rescue horse. The rhythmic motion was meditative, giving her time to process everything. Miss Mills. Rachel turned. A woman stood in the doorway, silhouetted against fading sunlight. Something about her seemed familiar. Can I help you? The woman stepped forward and Rachel's breath caught. Simone Harlow. Older, thinner, her confidence replaced with something tentative. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, Simone said quickly. But I had to tell you I'm sorry. Rachel set down the brush. What are you doing here, Simone? I heard about this place, and I realized I'm one of the women who needs help. Rachel studied her, searching for games, found only remorse and exhaustion. What happened? After the lawsuit, I thought I'd learned. But then I met someone else who promised everything, and I believed him. And he took everything I had left. Simone's hands twisted. I've been homeless for 6 months. I saw your picture in a magazine, and something told me to come here. Rachel felt a strange mix of emotions. Simone had hurt her, but Simone had also been a victim of David's lies. Why should I help you? You shouldn't. I treated you terribly. I believed David when he said you were the problem. I see now that I was the fool. Simone's voice dropped. Please, I have nowhere else to go. Rachel made a decision that surprised herself. There's a room in the East Barn. You can stay if you're willing to work, help with horses, attend workshops, commit to rebuilding. Simone's face crumpled with relief. Thank you. As Rachel showed Simone her room, she thought about the circle her life had made. The woman who'd helped destroy her marriage now seeking sanctuary in what Rachel had built. That evening, Andy had heard about Simone. His face was stormy. Why'd you let her stay? After what she did? Rachel pulled him close. Because punishing her doesn't heal me. Helping her, that's how I prove I'm better than the pain she caused. That's pretty forgiving, Mama. It's not forgiveness. Not yet. It's choosing not to let old anger poison what we've built. Andy was quiet. You're stronger than anybody I know. So are you, baby. 3 months later, Rachel received another envelope. David's handwriting. Inside were divorce papers signed and notarized. No demands. Just his signature and a note. I'm letting you go completely. No more letters. No more contact. You deserve peace. The ranch is yours. The life you've built is yours. I'm finally accepting I have no place in it. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. Rachel read it twice, then filed it with other legal documents. Closure came in waves, each washing away more of the past. Simone stayed at the sanctuary over a year, slowly rebuilding. She and Rachel never became friends, but developed mutual respect. 2 women damaged by the same man, finding wholeness by different paths. One morning, Simone came to Rachel with clear eyes. I'm ready to leave. I've got a job lined up, a fresh start. But before I go, you could have destroyed me. You had every right, but instead you saved me. I'll never forget that. Rachel took her hand. Then we're even. After Simone left, Rachel stood in the barn where everything began, where she'd first saved David from a storm. But the barn still stood. The sanctuary thrived. She'd survived the worst and transformed it into triumph. The barn had been renovated since those early days. The stalls were updated, the loft converted into proper living quarters. But Rachel had insisted they keep one thing unchanged, the exact spot where David had collapsed that stormy night. She'd marked it with a small plaque embedded in the floor, where it began, where I learned that saving someone doesn't mean they'll save you back. Women asked about it sometimes. Rachel would tell them the abbreviated version, that she'd saved a man here once, married him, and he'd tried to destroy her. That this spot represented both her greatest mistake and her greatest lesson. That you could stand in the exact place where your life changed and choose what that change would mean. A young woman named Iris, newly arrived at the sanctuary, with bruises still fading on her arms, had asked Rachel just last week, "Do you regret saving him?" Knowing what came after, Rachel had thought about it carefully before answering. No, because if I hadn't saved him, I wouldn't have built this place. I wouldn't be standing here with you right now. Every woman who walks through these gates is here because I learned that saving myself is more important than saving someone who doesn't want to be saved. So no, I don't regret it. I've transformed it. Andy found her as the sun set, painting everything gold. Nearly 16 now, preparing for college. But in this moment, still her boy. What are you thinking about, Mama? Rachel smiled. Everything. How the worst thing that happened led to the best thing I've built. Thunder Ridge. That and understanding my own strength. Learning that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. That sometimes the greatest revenge is just living well. Andy hugged her. Never broke you. No, Rachel agreed. He never did. They watched the sun disappear, sky blazing with color. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking sanctuary. But tonight, Rachel stood in the barn where her story began, surrounded by everything she'd protected and built. Not because David had lost, but because she'd found herself in wreckage and liked what she discovered. Stronger than love, wiser than betrayal, more powerful than any storm. The thunder that brought David into her life had faded to silence. But the thunder Rachel made herself, the sound of a woman refusing to break, that would echo for generations. Silence wasn't weakness. It never had been. It was the sound of a woman gathering strength before changing the world. And Rachel Mills had changed everything.